Testimony is underway in the third week of the criminal hush money trial involving former President Donald Trump. Today, the judge in the case held Trump in contempt of court for violating a gag order. Judge Juan Merchan says Trump violated the order not one, but 9 times and fined him, $1,000 each, total of $9,000. CBS News correspondent Errol Barnett is following this for us outside the courthouse in Manhattan. Errol, you've been there day in and day out. Talk to us about this decision today. This is new news this morning, and the warning to Trump that it's not just about paying fines. He could end up in jail for this.
That's exactly right, Lilia. Judge Juan Merchan now instituting some level of punishment to former President Donald Trump for what he says is a clear violation of 9 instances of the judge's gag order. And as a result, the former president, will pay $1,000 per violation. And he has apparently until 2:15 Eastern to remove the corresponding Truth Social posts and remarks from his campaign 2024 website in order to be inside the lines of what the court will allow. He cannot intimidate witnesses or jurors.
Okay, folks, let me just say this right now. What I'm about to tell you is going to make some people very, very angry. And honestly, good. Because this is one of those stories that should make your blood boil no matter which side you're on. This is one of those moments where you need to stop what you're doing and pay attention. Because what just happened in Washington is going to affect every single one of us. I'm not being dramatic here. I'm not exaggerating for clicks. This is the real deal. And by the time I'm done breaking this down for you, you're going to understand exactly why this matters so much. You're going to see why legal experts across the country are calling this a turning point in American history. So stick with me here, because this story is about to get wild. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
There's also one other aspect of the judge's order. Judge Juan Merchan also writes that the defendant is hereby warned by the court it will not tolerate continued willful violations of its lawful orders, and that if necessary and appropriate under the circumstances, it will impose an incarceratory punishment. So that is the threat of jail time to Trump if he continues to violate the gag orders. Now, for those keeping track at home, we have 9 violations of what the prosecution said were 10 violations, but last week they brought forth another 4. The judge is expected to hold a hearing on that decision on Thursday morning. So we're not out of the woods yet as far as Donald Trump's behavior as a defendant in this criminal case.
Well, let's get back to the trial now, Errol. The court also heard testimony today again from a bank executive, Guy Farrow. Why is he there? What did he have to say?
The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, the one place Trump thought he could count on, just handed him a massive defeat. And I'm not exaggerating here. This is huge. This is the kind of ruling that changes everything. The kind of ruling that legal experts are going to be talking about for the next 50 years. We're witnessing history unfold right before our eyes. The kind of history that gets written into textbooks. The kind that future generations are going to study and analyze. And you're here for it right now, watching it happen in real time. That's how significant this moment is. 4 months, 4 years actually, Trump and his legal team have been fighting tooth and nail to keep one simple idea alive. The idea that a president can do whatever he wants while in office and never ever face consequences for it. Total immunity, complete protection, a get out of jail free card that lasts forever. They wanted the courts to say that anything a president does is automatically protected, that no prosecutor anywhere could ever touch him. They made this argument over and over again in every court at every level. And you know what? The Supreme Court looked at that argument, really looked at it and said, nope, not happening. At least not for everything. They drew a line. They said there are limits. And now Trump has to deal with the consequences. Come on. Can you believe this? See, here's the thing most people don't understand about this ruling. Everyone's been so focused on the headline, Trump gets partial immunity, that they missed what actually matters. The Supreme Court basically said, yes, presidents are immune for official acts, things you do as part of your actual job, but unofficial acts, personal stuff, schemes you cook up that have nothing to do with running the country. You're on your own, buddy. No protection, no shield, nothing. And that right there, that distinction is about to blow up Trump's entire legal strategy, because prosecutors are now lining up to take him to trial on charges that fall outside his official powers. Election interference, hush money payments, all the stuff that wasn't about being president. It was about being Donald Trump. It was about protecting himself. It was about staying in power by any means necessary. This is wild. This is absolutely wild. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this is just another witch hunt, another attack from the radical left, another example of lawfare being used against the sitting president. And look, I get it. I understand why people feel that way. But hold on. Let's actually look at what happened here. Because the facts, and I mean the actual facts, tell a very different story than what you might be hearing from certain places. The facts tell us something that both sides need to understand. The Supreme Court didn't strip Trump of all immunity. They didn't say former presidents can be prosecuted for everything. What they said was, there's a line, there's a boundary. And when you cross that boundary, when you stop acting as president and start acting as a private citizen, pursuing your own interests, you don't get to hide behind the office anymore. You don't get to use the presidency as a shield for your personal conduct. And here's the kicker. The appeals court just revived Trump's effort to fight his hush money conviction, but they didn't throw it out. They didn't say he was innocent. They didn't give him what he really wanted. What they said was, and I'm paraphrasing here, we're not confident the trial court got it right when they admitted certain evidence. That's it. That's all they said. Nothing more. The conviction still stands. Trump is still a convicted felon, the first president in American history to hold that distinction. Let that sink in for a moment. The first president ever to be convicted of felonies. And now lower courts have to go back and figure out which pieces of evidence are protected by immunity and which ones aren't. Are you kidding me? This could take months, maybe years. And meanwhile, prosecutors are sharpening their knives, preparing for trials that could actually happen now. Trials that Trump spent years trying to delay and avoid. All those delay tactics, all those appeals, they bought him time, but they didn't make the cases go away. Legal experts, real legal experts, not talking heads on cable news, are calling this a game changer. They're saying this ruling delivers a fatal blow to Trump's ability to delay and evade accountability. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of people who actually understand how the legal system works. People who have spent their entire career studying constitutional law. And the political fallout, oh man, the political fallout is going to be something else entirely. MAGA activists are absolutely furious. They're calling this an assault on Trump, an attack on the presidency itself. They're saying the deep state has finally won. They're saying this proves the entire system is rigged against conservatives. But critics, and there are a lot of them, see this completely differently. They see it as a constitutional crisis that could actually save democracy. Because for the first time in American history, for the very first time, a sitting president is facing criminal trials for things he allegedly did before and during his time in office. That's unprecedented. That's never happened before. No one is above the law. That's what they keep saying. And maybe, just maybe, the Supreme Court actually meant it this time. So buckle up, because what I'm about to break down for you is going to change everything you thought you knew about presidential power, about accountability, and about what happens when the highest court in the land finally draws a line in the sand. Let's get into it. All right. So here's where things get really interesting, because most people, and I mean most people, have completely misunderstood what this ruling actually means. They've been fed a narrative that doesn't match reality, and I'm here to set the record straight. You've probably seen the headlines. Trump gets immunity. Supreme Court protects the president. All that stuff. And yeah, technically that's true, but it's only half the story. Maybe less than half. The devil is in the details. And the details are where Trump's problems really begin. Let me explain what's really going on here. Let me break this down in a way that actually makes sense. Because once you understand the full picture, once you see what's really happening behind the scenes, you're going to realize that this story is way more complicated than anyone is telling you. When the Supreme Court handed down its decision on presidential immunity back in July of 2024, it created what legal experts are calling a two-tier system. On one tier, you've got official acts, things the president does as part of his constitutional duties, commanding the military, issuing pardons, running the executive branch, talking to foreign leaders, making policy decisions. For those things, presidents get absolute immunity, total protection, can't be prosecuted, period, end of story. But then there's the second tier, unofficial acts, private conduct, personal schemes, things that have nothing to do with the actual job of being president. And this is where everything falls apart for Trump. This is where his legal strategy hits a brick wall. This is where all those years of delay tactics and appeals finally run into a barrier they can't get around. The courts have drawn a line, and Trump is on the wrong side of it. See, the prosecutors in these cases, They've been arguing from day one that the stuff Trump is accused of wasn't official presidential business. It was personal. The hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, that wasn't about running the country. That was about protecting Donald Trump's reputation during a campaign. That was about keeping a scandal quiet so it wouldn't hurt his chances of winning. The alleged election interference, same thing. Prosecutors say that was Trump acting as a candidate, not as a president. He was trying to stay in power, not trying to execute the laws of the United States. He was trying to overturn an election he lost, not carrying out his constitutional duties. And now, after all the appeals and all the delays, the courts are finally going to decide which is which. They're finally going to draw the line. This is where it gets complicated. And honestly, a little scary, because nobody knows exactly how this is going to play out. Because here's what the appeals court just did. They looked at Trump's hush money conviction, all 34 felony counts, and they said we need to take another look at this. Not because Trump is innocent, not because the jury got it wrong, not because the evidence wasn't there, but because of one specific question. Did the trial court allow evidence that should have been protected by presidential immunity? That's the issue. That's what's being litigated right now. That's what all this fighting is about. During Trump's trial, prosecutors used testimony from Hope Hicks. She was Trump's White House communications director, one of his closest aides. They also used testimony from Madeleine Westerhout, another White House aide who worked right outside the Oval Office. And Trump's lawyers are now arguing that this testimony was protected, that it related to official acts, that it never should have been heard by the jury, that it tainted the entire trial. Like, come on. Are we really doing this right now? The Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, is pushing back hard on this. His office is saying the immunity case has no bearing on this prosecution. They're arguing that even if the Supreme Court's reasoning did apply here, it wouldn't support throwing out the verdict. The conviction should stand. Why? Because the hush money payments happened before Trump was president. The cover-up happened while he was in office. Sure, but the underlying scheme was personal, private, unofficial. It was about Donald Trump the man, not Donald Trump the president. And here's what Judge Hellerstein, the federal judge who keeps rejecting Trump's attempts to move the case, actually wrote. He said private schemes with private actors, unconnected to any statutory or constitutional authority or function of the executive, are considered unofficial acts. They don't get protection. They don't get immunity. That's pretty clear. That's about as clear as legal language gets. You can't get much more straightforward than that. But Trump's lawyers aren't giving up. They never give up. They're throwing everything they've got at this. Every possible argument, every legal theory they can think of. They've argued that the whole trial was fatally marred. That Judge Merchan, the trial judge, should have recused himself because he donated $15 to Joe Biden's campaign back in 2020. $15. That's literally less than the cost of lunch. That's what they're hanging their argument on. They're arguing that federal election law should have preempted the state charges. They're arguing that the Supreme Court's immunity decision completely changes everything. They're saying the case should never have been brought in the first place. And the appeals court, they didn't buy all of it, but they bought enough to send the case back for another look, enough to give Trump another chance to fight. Now here's where we need to talk about what this really means for American democracy. Because this isn't just about Trump. This is about every president who comes after him. This is about the future of executive power in this country. This is about whether we're still a nation of laws or whether we've become something else entirely. Legal scholars are divided on this. Some are saying this ruling makes future presidents untouchable for abuses of office, that it creates a law-free zone around the presidency, that it gives presidents permission to break the law as long as they can claim it was official business. Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, actually wrote that the president is now a king above the law. Those are her exact words. A king above the law, not a public servant, not an elected official accountable to the people. A king. She went through all these hypotheticals. What if a president orders the assassination of a political rival? Immune. What if a president organizes a military coup to stay in power? Immune. What if a president takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. 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 Now, the majority said those scenarios are far-fetched, that they're not realistic, that no president would actually do those things. But are they really? Are we so sure about that? I mean, think about everything we've seen over the past few years. Think about all the norms that have been shattered, all the boundaries that have been crossed. Are we really confident that no future president would push those limits? Constitutional law experts are pointing out something important here. We've gone this entire time, over 200 years, without presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, and it hasn't had a chilling effect on the presidency. Presidents knew there were boundaries. There were lines they couldn't cross. There were consequences for breaking the law. But now those boundaries are a lot fuzzier than they used to be. The rules have changed, and nobody knows exactly what that means. Steve Vladek, he's a law professor at Georgetown, called the immunity decision stunningly and myopically naive. He said, "We're seeing the consequences of that decision play out in real time. Every day brings new examples of how this ruling is being used to expand presidential power." And then there's the other side of this, the people who say this ruling was necessary, that presidents need protection to do their jobs effectively, that without immunity, future presidents would be constantly worried about prosecution by their political enemies. That was actually Justice Alito's argument. He asked whether presidents might be incentivized to commit crimes just to stay in power because they're scared of being prosecuted after they leave office. He worried about a cycle of political prosecutions. Think about that for a second. The argument is that we need to give presidents immunity so they don't commit crimes to avoid prosecution. We need to protect them from accountability so they don't try to destroy democracy to avoid being held accountable. That's something. That's really something. But here's the bottom line. Here's what matters right now, today, in November of 2025. Trump is still fighting. He's still appealing. He's still trying to get his conviction thrown out. And the courts are still wrestling with questions that have never been answered before. Questions that will shape American democracy for generations. Because here's the thing, nobody wants to admit, we've never been here before. We've never had a sitting president who was convicted of felonies before taking office. We've never had to figure out what immunity means in a situation like this. We're in uncharted territory, and that means everything is up for grabs. Every ruling could set a precedent. Every decision could change how presidents are held accountable for generations to come. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher. The Trump administration, and I'm talking about his official legal team, is calling all of this a witch hunt. They're saying radical Democrat lawfare is being used to attack a sitting president. They're saying the Supreme Court's decision mandates that these cases be dismissed. They're saying the whole thing is unconstitutional. But the courts keep saying, not so fast, not so fast. So, let's break this down. Let's talk about what actually matters here and what's coming next. Because there's a lot of noise out there, a lot of confusion. Let me cut through all of it and give you the facts. Let me give you the information you need to understand what's really happening. Because the media isn't going to tell you this. The talking heads on cable news aren't going to break it down like this, but I am. So here we go. 4 major points you need to understand about this entire situation. 4 things that are going to determine the future of this case and potentially the future of American democracy itself. First point, the conviction stands. I cannot stress this enough. Despite everything you're hearing, despite all the appeals and all the legal maneuvering, Donald Trump remains a convicted felon. 34 counts, falsifying business records, found guilty by a jury of his peers in May of 2024. That's a fact. That's reality. That's what happened. Yes, he received an unconditional discharge at sentencing. That means no jail time, no fines, no probation, no community service, nothing. Judge Merchant called it the only lawful sentence to prevent encroaching upon the highest office in the land. He said his hands were tied. He couldn't send a sitting president to prison. But the conviction, still there, on his record, forever, unless he can somehow get it overturned on appeal, unless he can convince a court to wipe it clean. And that's what all this fighting is about. Trump doesn't want to just avoid prison. He wants that conviction erased, wiped clean, like it never happened. He wants to be able to say he was never convicted. He wants to erase this chapter of history. Can he do it? Maybe, but it's going to take a lot more legal battles to find out. A lot more time, a lot more money, a lot more courtroom drama. Second point, the immunity ruling is a double-edged sword. Look, the Supreme Court did give Trump something. They created this framework where official presidential acts are protected from prosecution. That's real. That matters. That's something his lawyers can work with. But here's what Trump's critics keep pointing out. The ruling also confirmed that unofficial acts aren't protected. Personal conduct isn't protected. Private schemes aren't protected. And if prosecutors can prove that something Trump did was outside his official duties, he can be tried for it. He can be held accountable. The Manhattan DA's office is arguing exactly that. They're saying the hush money scheme was private. It was personal. It had nothing to do with Trump's job as president. The payments happened before he even took office. The reimbursements were disguised as legal fees. The whole thing was designed to protect Trump, the candidate, not Trump, the president. It was about politics, not policy. And honestly, that's a pretty strong argument. That's hard to argue with. The evidence is clear. The timeline is clear. And now the courts have to decide whether that matters. Third point, lower courts are going to decide everything. This is what most people miss. The Supreme Court set the rules, but it's the lower courts that have to apply them. And that process is messy. It's complicated. It takes time. It's not going to be resolved overnight. It's going to drag on for months, maybe years. Right now, Judge Hellerstein has been told to take another look at Trump's request to move his case to federal court. He has to examine specific pieces of evidence. He has to decide whether testimony from White House aides was protected by immunity. He has to figure out if that changes whether Trump has a federal defense. He has to weigh all the competing arguments. That's a lot of work. And whatever he decides, it's going to be appealed, probably all the way back up to the Supreme Court. The legal fight is going to continue no matter what happens at the lower court level. Meanwhile, Trump is also appealing through the state court system. His lawyers filed their appeal just a few weeks ago. They're asking New York's appellate court to overturn the conviction entirely. They're making every argument they can think of. So we've got two parallel tracks here, federal and state, both moving forward, both potentially headed to the Supreme Court, and nobody knows how long any of this is going to take. Nobody knows which track will get there first. Nobody knows what the final outcome will be. Fourth point, this is about more than Trump. I know, everything in politics seems to be about Trump these days. Every headline, every cable news segment, every social media debate, it's all Trump all the time. But this ruling, this fight, it's going to shape presidential power for decades. It's going to affect every president who comes after. It's going to change how we think about executive power in America. Think about it. Before this case, the conventional wisdom was that presidents could be prosecuted for crimes. That's why Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, because without a pardon, Nixon could have faced criminal charges for Watergate. Everyone understood that presidents weren't above the law. But now we have this new framework, absolute immunity for core official acts, presumptive immunity for other official acts, no immunity for unofficial acts, a whole new set of rules that courts are going to be interpreting for years. What does that mean in practice? Nobody really knows yet. The courts are going to be figuring this out for years, maybe decades. Every new case will add another piece to the puzzle. And here's the scary part. What if a future president uses this ruling as cover for abuses of power? What if they argue that everything they do is an official act? What if they claim immunity for things that previous presidents would never have dreamed of doing? What if they push the boundaries further than anyone thought possible? That's not a hypothetical. That's a real concern. Legal scholars are genuinely worried about this. They're writing papers about it. They're sounding alarms. The Brennan Center for Justice called this ruling an instruction manual for law-breaking presidents. They said make sure you conspire only with other government employees, and you'll never be held to account. That's a chilling thought. That's the kind of thing that keeps constitutional scholars up at night. That's dark, but it might be accurate. So where does this leave us? Where do we go from here? It leaves us watching, waiting, seeing how the lower courts handle these cases, seeing whether Trump can actually get his conviction overturned, seeing whether prosecutors can successfully argue that his alleged crimes were unofficial acts, seeing how this all plays out. It leaves us wondering whether the principle that no one is above the law still means anything in America, whether the Constitution still works the way we thought it did, whether our system of checks and balances can actually hold, and it leaves us bracing for what comes next. Because this story is far from over. The legal battles are just beginning. The constitutional questions are just starting to be asked. Because make no mistake, this fight is far from over. Trump is going to keep appealing. Prosecutors are going to keep pushing. And somewhere, probably at the Supreme Court, we're going to get a final answer about what presidential immunity really means. We're going to find out whether presidents can truly be held accountable for their actions. The implications for American democracy couldn't be higher. We're literally deciding whether presidents can be held accountable for crimes, whether there are any limits on executive power, whether the Constitution means what it says about no one being above the law. These are the questions that will define our democracy for generations. That's what's at stake here. Not just Trump's conviction, not just one case, not just one president, the entire framework of presidential accountability. The very idea that we're a nation of laws, not a nation of kings. So yeah, this is a big deal. This is a really big deal. Maybe the biggest deal of our lifetimes. And if you think things are crazy now, just wait. Because what happens in these courts over the next few months could change everything. Could reshape American democracy. Could redefine what it means to be president. Stay tuned. This story is just getting started. And trust me, you're going to want to see how it ends.